exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz.
Tim, why are we hiding behind this boulder in the middle of the night?
Shh. Keep your voice down before the guards hear us.
What guards?
Whacking hot. We're not supposed to be this close to the Area 51 runway. It's a top secret base where the government is supposedly hiding back-engineered UFOs and maybe even an alien or two. Haven't you heard Bob Lazar talk about how he worked there and went inside one of these extraterrestrial craft? Look, there's a ship landing on the runway, on the base right now. Let's get closer.
Oh, no. Those may not be UFOs. They could just be the tops of patrol cars coming to grab our asses. Let's get out of here.
Okay, by me. Meet you back at the KCOR studio in safe Las Vegas.
Beautiful Las Vegas.
Sin City. I think I don't know why they would call it Sin City. Actually,
yeah, it's for the tourist. Ask our producer Tina. She'll tell you all about it.
I bet. Well, actually, I visited area. You ever been out to Area 51, Tim?
Just probably like everyone else, just right on the very extreme edge. No closer. They won't let you get any closer than that.
Well, we actually had a super mini UFO convention one time out at the Little Alien Inn. We had Bill Cooper in his more sane days, if there ever was such a period, and Gary Schultz, Noria Hayakawa, who's a friend of the show, and we had about 100 people in the parking lot and in the bar listening to talks on Area 51, and then we all went out for a sky watch, and the sheriff showed up, or the constable, or who. It wasn't whacking hut. They just patrol the perimeter of the base. But I guess they're in radio contact with the local police. And the next day we were on the local news there in Vegas, and they had the nerve to interview the constable, and he said, "Oh, we don't mind them coming out here, to do their sky watching. But in the meantime, they're stopping every little old lady and include me in a little a group also. They're stopping people and giving them alcohol breathalyzer tests to see if they're drunk. I don't know if you could get drunk at the Little Alien Inn, to be honest with you, but." I saw a jackrabbit, jump across the road. So I put on the brakes and swerved a little, and they started to light up and pulled me over and made me, hop on my 1 foot and spell Donald Trump's name backwards 3 times or something.
I couldn't do that sober.
So that was. But nobody had a sighting. I mean, the sightings always seemed to be when I wasn't there. I'd be, of course, at the black mailbox, which I guess isn't around anymore. But we'll have to ask Nick about that. And I'm sure he's got he should have the inside scoop on Area 51, because this book I have here that just came is about 450 pages, and it's got every little bit of information about this super secret base. That can't be too secret if he's got a book that's 450 pages. But anyway, Tim, why don't you get down to the nitty gritty and let's get gritty and tell the listeners out there what we're going to be talking about tonight and who we're going to be talking with. before the constable comes and gets me.
Well, sure. And you say you got the book Area 51, the Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies. I got a copy of his book that came just before that called Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. So, I mean, we've got two of Nick's most recent books that we'll have to bring up today. But, we're talking about Nick, so Nick has graciously making a return visit to Exploring the Bizarre, and Nick is a full-time author and journalist specializing in a wide range of unsolved mysteries, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, UFO sightings, government conspiracies, alien abductions, and all of the stuff that we know and love. Now, Nick travels and lectures extensively around the world. He's originally from England. You can't tell that by listening to him, and he currently lives in Dallas, Texas. Now, his most recent books include The Slender Man Mysteries, an internet urban legend come to life, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, and the Area 51, Revealing the Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies. And later on during this show, we'll have a visit from our friend Hercules Invictus. But the first hour, it belongs exclusively to Nick. So, Nick, great to have you on with us tonight.
Hey, guys. Well, thanks for having me on again.
Well, Nick, why did you decide to write? I mean, Area 51 has been around for a while. I mean, it was top secret, supposedly, but everybody in the UFO field knew about it. I mean, what kind of got you... your motors are running to write about it at this point?
Well, there were a couple of things. One of them was that over the years there have been a number of books written on Area 51, probably 5 or 6, and most of them, and there's nothing wrong with this, but most of them primarily focused upon the secret aircrafts, stealth aircraft projects, and kind of with a nod to UFOs, which was sometimes in sort of a light-hearted fashion. And I thought, well, okay, there's been 5 or 6, 7 books written on Area 51 from that perspective, so why don't I sort of change things up and write a book that told the story of the history of Area 51, but that for the most part focused exclusively on the UFO angle, which hadn't really been done on before, and which surprises a lot of people who think, well, there's so many books out there, but they don't realize they're actually not on UFOs. They really are on, like, the stealth bomber, the stealth fighter, claims of other secret aircraft, things like that. So I thought, why not finally get to the grips, with the all of the UFO stories that have been tied to Area 51, and try and once and for all to, figure out exactly what is going on, specifically in relation to the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit in time. Now, I know that Area 51 was used to test the atomic nuclear weapons. Is that correct?
Well, basically, the area where Area 51 exists today goes back, in terms of military work, it actually goes back to the early days of the Second World War. Now, when we had the sort of terrible events at Pearl Harbor, when the United States was hit by surprise and thousands were killed, the military and the government vowed, this won't happen again. So what happened was that plans were initiated to try and establish an establishment, a facility that the Japanese would never be able to penetrate. And so they chose an isolated place in the United States, specifically out in the desert of Nevada, which wasn't at the time known as Area 51. In fact, it was a large area made up of various installations called one of them was the 4th Air Force Bombing and Gunnery Range, the Tonopah Army Airfield, and the India Springs Auxiliary Army Airfield. They were all in the area where broadly today Area 51 is. So those installations were quickly installed post Pearl Harbor to try and create facilities where new and novel types of technology and artillery and bombs and etc. could be created to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again. Now, that was sort of early to mid 40s, but through the late 40s and through the 50s, ultimately you had the development out at a place called Groom Lake, which is this dry bed lake, known as the Nevada Test and Training Range. And the NTNT became this huge area of land which incorporates Area 51. And so when the NTNTR was created in the 50s, in the early to mid-50s, what happened was you had the beginnings of classified aircraft programs like flights of the U-2 program, and then in the 60s with the Blackbird SL-71 spy plane. And so it was the 50s onwards when Area 51 began, but for 10 years before, after Pearl Harbor, it was essentially a catch-all area for numerous military installations, which eventually became combined, and you had this secret base, which more and more land was grabbed by the government to ensure that less and less people would have access to that area.
Well, now, did these Nazi scientists that came over under Project Paperclip, were any of them sent out there in the early days?
Not so much in the early, certainly not in sort of 45, 46.
No. I'm thinking of 50-ish.
Oh yeah, some of the German scientists, particularly those, maybe even exclusively those who worked on rocket programs, they certainly did work out at Area 51 because it was quickly realized that propeller-driven bombers and fighter planes were going to eventually be relegated, if you like, or at least perceived as not being as adequate as high-flying and fast-moving missiles and rocketry. So a lot of the early rocketry research actually was undertaken at what is now portions of Area 51. And this, as you said, it does relate to the government's highly classified Operation Paperclip, which was designed to bring German scientists at the end of the Second World War to the United States. And some of them ended up at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, Fort Bliss, other installations that were working in the field of rocketry. And in the early 50s to mid-50s, when Area 51 was finally constructed, rocketry also went ahead under there as well, including a number of paperclip scientists.
When was the base first connected to UFOs? I mean, well, first of all, when did the base first become known by the public? I know there were some Russian satellites that took pictures of the base, but that was later on too. When was actually did it become Area 51, and how did it get connected to UFOs?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that is one of the most important aspects. When did it go from being just sort of like a regular area for military installations to something more? Now, what you had in the early to mid-50s, the CIA had sort of like a pressing need to have an area where they could test fly new and classified and radical spy planes without anybody knowing, not just the public or the media, but the Russians and just about everybody else. So they chose this area, which ultimately became the Nevada Test and Training Range. And one of those areas within this vast, even bigger area known as the NTNT, they chose an area near Groom Lake, which essentially they saw Groom Lake as this gigantic runway that could be used for classified aircraft tests. And there were plans for other secret aircraft to be created and developed and flown. And this all occurred around about 53 to 55. And it was through 55, 56 when the base was really fully established, or at least to the point that it was then. And you had personnel working out there, 2 weeks on and 4 or 5 days home and so on, that kind of thing. And that's when things really took off big time. Now, the people who lived in that area, they knew all too well as to what was going out there, because back then, unlike today, you didn't have these severe security fences every couple of miles and threats of deadly force and things like that. That's how it is today. You cannot get within about 10 or 15 miles of the base, and it's still surrounded by mountains and so on. Back then, the security surrounding the base was very strong, but it didn't extend for that sort of 10, 15 miles. It was just a couple of miles. So the locals knew all too well what was going on, but didn't really say much about it. And it wasn't really, as incredible as it might sound, it actually wasn't until the early 1980s when the Air Force made a plea, if you like, to the government, or put an idea, if you like, to the government, stating that, look, for national security reasons, we need to expand this particular portion of the NTNTR, which was known as Area 51. And so a proposal was put together that the government could essentially seize literally thousands upon thousands of acres of land, which would be allocated to Area 51 staff, and people would be not allowed anywhere within sort of 10, 15 miles of the base. And
well, I know they used to go. They used to hike up. What was it, Freedom Ridge?
Yeah, that's right. Freedom Ridge and several other places until the 80s were actually, and quite surprisingly to a lot of people, if you knew where to go, you could climb the mountains and see portions of Area 51. And to its sort of concern, the government realized that the more and more people came out there, more and more people were finding little ways to climb the hills and the mountains and see what was going on. So that's why they made this plan to say to the government, look, this is a classified installation. It's where most of our secret research is going on. We need to keep people away, period. And that's what happened. There was a lot of controversial debate between about 84 and 87 where people were being offered, admittedly, substantial amounts of money to move. Some of them were happy to do it, because the amount of money they're being offered was quite high. Others wanted to stay in the area, didn't like the fact that their family and, for generations had lived in that area. But essentially it came down
to kind of desolate area, to say the least.
Well, it was, but I guess the people who'd grown up in that area, and enjoyed that lifestyle, they didn't mind. But eventually it came down to the government saying, look, you either take this substantial amount of money and move, or you face losing everything, and we'll just take the ground and the land anyway. So, it was one of those catch-22 situations. And that was between 84 and around about 86, 87. And when that happened, people started to look closer at what was going out there. And then in 88, you had Bob Lazar come forward with his claims. And that's really how it all led to the UFO component to it all.
You think Lazar was the first... well, there was a guy on the radio there. What was his name? Goodman, I think. Who
Billy
had
Goodman.
a show, and Billy, and he had a couple of people that come on the program, disguising their voice, and apparently telling stories about what was going on at the base. That would have been the mid '80s or something, I think. Have you ever met Bob Lazar? Did you ever talk to him personally?
I've never spoken to him personally, no. But I mean, he is an interesting guy because, the nature of his story. Now, a lot of people, for example, one of the most famous people in ufology, Stan Friedman. Stan has no time at all for the Lazar story. In fact, to quote him exactly with 3 words, he said that Lazar's story is, when I quote here, bunk, bunk, bunk. That's literally how Stan.
Yeah, but that's Stan. I mean, anything that he's one of these ufologists, and we all love Stan, but he's one of these ufologists. If you don't read the same, books that he reads, or acknowledge the same reports that he does, or poo-poo the same people that he does, then you're not on the same page as he is. So you got to take what Stan says with a grain of salt. Not that Bob Lazar has necessarily proved himself, but then on the other hand, one has to wonder, why would somebody go to this extreme to tell the stories that he's told over the years, and he has not been totally vindicated, but he also hasn't been totally proven to be a total fraud either.
No, you're right. And I mean, one of the things that particularly interests me about the Lazar story is that, people have said that, they're not able to prove his background. Well, to a degree, that is a fact. We know for sure that he did do a number of courses in the early days after finishing college and so on. And some of those papers that he claims, should have existed cannot be found. But what we do know for sure was that in the early 1980s, Lazar did work at a place called the Los Alamos in New Mexico, Los Alamos Neutron Science Center. And it was basically a physics-based facility doing research. Now, that's not hearsay or rumor, when it comes to claims concerning his work at what was known in abbreviated the Lance facility. That is a historical fact. He did work there in the early 1980s, and it was a highly classified facility doing advanced physics-based technology. That's a fact that he worked for that group, Lance, the Los Alamos Neutron Science Center. Now, one of the reasons why I'm quite open-minded on the Lazar story is not just because he held this position in 6 years before he came public and forward about the UFO angle. He did not come across like your average hoaxer. Now, I'm sure Tim will remember from some of the more dubious contactees in the 50s when the story dried up, they create new aspects to the story and new photographs of flying saucers out in the desert. Lazar did not do any of that. What he did, he told his story to George Knapp in Nevada, who's one of the leading media people in Nevada. And he basically told his story. And in the 30 years that have now gone by, because it was 88 when Lazar came out, in that 30 years, Lazar has not attempted to sell his story to Hollywood. He has not written a book. The number of times
I think he did. I think he did at some point try to sell his story to Hollywood, and it never got off the ground.
Well, he certainly didn't push it, deeply. And on top of that, he didn't write his own book about the experience.
No,
he still is a very clever guy. He could easily have written an extensive book. He chose not to.
All right, okay, guys, let me interrupt you here because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Nick Redfern on Exploring the Bizarre, so stay tuned for more.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Right now we are talking with Nick Redfern, and before we had to go to our break, we were talking about Bob Lazar. And so, Nick, I know that you have written before that you think that Bob probably did see what he claimed to see, but you think that there could be a possibility that his interpretation of what he saw may not be the actual fact.
Yeah, that's one of the things I actually extensively expand on in the book, namely the idea that Lazar was deliberately brought into the program, essentially like as a unknowing patsy, and the idea being that he was shown allegedly classified files on the history of UFO programs in the US and Roswell and stuff like that, and also shown a number of odd-looking craft. But the theory is that maybe this was all a brilliant sort of strange ruse possibly aimed at the Soviets, as it was still the Soviet Union then, trying to convince the Soviets that we had access to alien technology and kind of put the fear of God into the Russians, but also to try and smoke out Russian agents that were believed to be in the Nevada area and trying to figure out what was going on at Area 51. So the theory is they gave these, Ivan and Dmitry, pointers in relation to classified information on UFOs, which was basically bogus material designed to smoke out those same agents. In that sense, nothing was actually compromised. The Russian agents were captured as they were trying to figure out what was going on with Lazar, and no real stories, no real classified secrets were compromised, just bizarre stories of aliens that they used to try and reel in the Soviets, which, if you think about it, it might sound strange, but using the UFO subject as a means to try and reel in Soviet agents would be an ideal way to kind of do it,
Well, the thing about Lazar also is that the Air Force, the CIA, whoever was possibly responsible for doing this at Area 51, realized that this was a guy who was extremely intelligent. So they really probably brought out some really top secret technology in order to be able to fool him.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, that particular theory is an interesting one, but admittedly, it is reliant on, an incredible ruse having been created. Like, for example, he claimed to have read untold numbers of classified files on the history of the UFO phenomenon, the government's secret knowledge of the subject. So a lot of would have had to gone into that, but more so, the craft that potentially looked like flying saucers would have had to have been constructed also, which wouldn't necessarily have been impossible, but it does demonstrate that if that theory is the true one, then a lot of work would have gone into it. Or, by the other token, maybe Lazar was actually telling the story really as it was,
Well, I guess that some people asked him, some of the more mundane aspects of where he was located at Area 51, like, where the cafeteria was and where the bathroom was. And he told them, he said, well, of course, I don't think there's anybody who was able to verify that. But, he's always say, well, yeah, from this room, you go down the hallway and turn left and there was the bathroom. And, those kind of stories he never really wavered from.
Yeah, and one of the other things that sort of goes against, the hoaxing, unless it's like a really sort of multi-layered conspiracy theory. One of the things is that Lazar said on one occasion he was deliberately, by some of the staff, he was deliberately taken down one particular corridor which had a door on its right and a glass entry. And one of the staff said, when we walk past that door, don't look in that room. Which is like kind of, you just want to look. Well, Lazar was taken down that corridor and certainly, he did what he wasn't supposed to do. He quickly had a look and he said he saw two guys in sort of like white coats looking down at a small figure about 3 feet tall, and they ushered him on and pushed him on. So he barely had like a second or so to see it. But, a lot of people would say, oh my God, that's proof of aliens at Area 51. But to his credit, if that's the term to use, Lazar said he actually felt it was like a staged thing to try and convince him that the Area 51 was in cahoots with living aliens. Now, I would have thought that somebody really perpetrating an amazing hoax would say, oh yeah, that was proof of aliens at Area 51. But Lazar said no, he felt it was a mind game that was being played on him by the staff for obscure reasons that he didn't necessarily have the big picture for. So that too doesn't sound like your average hoaxer who would, your average hoaxer would milk that story all the way and say, oh yeah, I saw an alien and it wasn't a dummy. But Lazar said, well, no, I think it probably was a dummy.
And Lazar, I mean, he's not the only person who has had similar experiences with the military that seem to point to possible, human alien interaction, but could actually point to, like you were saying, some kind of setup.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can go through the 80s and the 90s and through right now pretty much the present day, where a number of whistleblowers, so-called whistleblowers, have come forward stating, or sharing stories very similar to Lazar's, working on super heavy elements designed to fly flying saucer type craft in the skies of Nevada. Other people claim to have seen alien autopsies, files on alien autopsies out at Area 51. Also claim to have seen alien bodies in cryogenic tanks out at the base, and all sorts of aspects of, the more controversial aspects of the UFO subject, but they all kind of come back to Area 51.
Mm-hmm. So, Tim Beckley was wanting to know about some of these other now unfortunately somewhat obscure figures. It was Dorothy Kilgallen. Is that one of the people you were talking about, Tim? Yeah, and their possible associations with the UFO mystery. Well, and the other interesting thing is that you start to trace some of these sources, and you see this kind of strange connection between, say, like Area 51, the UFO mystery, the JFK assassination, even as far as, and it is kind of, far out there, but, like the death of Marilyn Monroe. And it just seems, weird to me that you have what seems to be very diverse subjects that, if you look hard enough, there seems to be a possible connection.
Yeah, you're right. This gets into sort of really controversial and weird areas. Now, what happened in this kind of all began in the mid-1990s, specifically 1995, when a guy named Milo Spiriglio held a press conference in California. Now, Spiriglio, he's dead now, but he wrote 3 books on the death of Marilyn Monroe, all basically following up the sort of the conspiracy angle, that it wasn't suicide or accidental death, that it was, that the Kennedy brothers had shared information with Marilyn Monroe, classified information, as a means to try and kind of impress her into the bedroom, that kind of thing. And then when they all fell out, the Kennedys realized that she'd got all this classified information from them, and she was a threat to national security. And so, next thing happened, she dies. That's sort of the conspiratorial theory as it stands to this day. Right. Now, in '95, Spiriglio, who was also a private detective, he released this one-page alleged CIA document talking about Marilyn Monroe's knowledge of certain information given to her by the Kennedys. And this was actually a CIA document that was working on wiretap data that the CIA had sort of implanted in Marilyn Monroe's home and so on. And according to the documents, one of the stories that the Kennedys told Marilyn Monroe related to strange bodies. Doesn't refer aliens or UFOs, as a lot of people assume if they haven't read the document carefully, but it does talk about strange bodies and craft from outer space. But the inference is they're talking about aliens.
Right.
Now, and it also talks about the president's visit to, quote, a secret base to see these things from space. So the idea of a secret base almost immediately, sort of creates imagery of Area 51, but in a 1962 context. Now, what a lot of people don't know, but I talk about quite deeply in the book, is that also in 1962, you had something else happen that a lot of people don't know about, and that was the release of a Hollywood movie called 7 Days in May. And 7 Days in May, it's a really good film. It stars Kirk Douglas and Ava Gardner and Burt Lancaster, and it's about a coup within the U.S. military that tries to take over the U.S. government. And a lot of this, all the work to try and overthrow the government is undertaken at a secret place in the desert called, excuse me, what's the name, the exact name? Site Y, like Y for yellow. It's called Site Y in the movie and the book of the same name, the novel of the same name. No, if you watch the movie and read the book, Site Y, this secret base in the desert that even the government or the president doesn't know about, sounds extraordinarily like Area 51. And the story of Site Y, which was also turned into a movie, was released, the novel was released in the same year that Marilyn Monroe. And the significant suggestions that there'd been a leak in the early 60s about the existence of Area 51, which led to the development of the movie and the claims in the CIA documents. So, you can make a case that somebody in the early 60s had leaked information on Area 51 to the creators of 7 Days in May and the authors of the novel, and it became known in fictional terms as Site Y. But for all intents and purposes, if you look at it today, you might as well call it Area 51.
That is a great movie, by the way. 7 Days in May. I need to watch that again. It's been a while.
If you go back and read it, you'll see, almost instantaneously when they bring Site Y up, and the government doesn't know, and the president doesn't know, and it's sort of funded outside of Congress. You think, wow, this is Area 51, but the movie was 1962.
I don't know if you remember this, talking about Marilyn Monroe, but I mean, it's been more than 5 years ago, but I guess that I read this news report, and, it happened once, and I've never been able to find it again, where somebody who was renovating Marilyn's house where she had died found like decrepit radio transmitter equipment in the chimney. And they couldn't, by that point it was rusted and falling apart, but they definitely could tell that it was some kind of transmitter. So definitely somebody was interested in what Marilyn was doing around the time that she passed away.
Well, that's interesting. You should say that because as we got into this at the start, mentioned Dorothy Kilgallen. Well, Dorothy Kilgallen was a well-known investigative journalist and TV celebrity in the late 50s through the 60s. And the alleged CIA document is essentially transcripts of sort of tape recordings of conversations between Marilyn Monroe, a man named Howard Rothberg, who was a friend of Dorothy Kilgallen, and with Dorothy Kilgallen as well. And according to the document, the CIA were listening to all three, Marilyn Monroe, Howard Rothberg, Dorothy Kilgallen, and basically it was a case of the CIA listening in, not to the government, but to these three people, and realizing that they had essentially been given stuff that related straight back to the Kennedys. Now, we do know that for sure that Marilyn Monroe was put under deep surveillance. If you read her now declassified FBI file, for example, which you can find online at the FBI's website, The Vault, you can see in there how she was being watched extremely closely. And estimates have suggested that perhaps even 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 intelligence agencies independently had her home wiretapped, if you like, to ensure or to see who was talking to who and who was spilling secrets, to get somebody into bed, that kind of thing.
And Dorothy herself, she died under somewhat mysterious circumstances, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. I mean, what's interesting is that, we have this Kennedy JFK connection to Marilyn Monroe. And after President Kennedy was killed on November the 22nd, 1963, Dorothy Kilgallen started her own investigation of the assassination. She was actually one of the last people to have a one-to-one interview with Jack Ruby, who shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald the day after Oswald supposedly killed the president. And she claimed that she was getting close to the truth of the UFO phenomenon. Then in 1967, she was found dead in bed from what was described as an accidental overdose of pills and alcohol. Now, what's intriguing is if you go back to 1955, when Dorothy Kilgallen was on vacation with her husband in Europe, she wrote a story when she got back about how a high-ranking official in the British government had told her about a story of crashed UFOs and dead aliens in the desert, etc., which sounds very much like the content in that CIA document. And so Dorothy Kilgallen, as a result of that meeting in the UK, and you can actually find her her article online, as a result of that exposure on her part to the UFO subject and her deep friendship with Marilyn Monroe, you start to see the threads come together, and then it ties in the same year as Marilyn died. You've got 7 Days in May coming out, and this barely disguised military installation, which sounds just like Area 51. You put all those pieces together, and you actually do have something that seems to be quite credible when you put all the pieces together.
So what's happened to Dorothy's notes, paperwork, things like that? That, you know, if she was getting that close, she undoubtedly had to have, some of this written down.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of her records are available. For example, there are a number of JFK-based archives where, people who corresponded with her donated, their correspondence and letters, that kind of thing. You can read those. And I managed to get Dorothy Kilgallen's FBI file as well, which runs to about 200, 250 pages. I also got the CIA's file on her, which is only about 15 pages, and is heavily sanitized. It really doesn't tell you much at all. But what is interesting is if you look at the FBI's file, they were watching her pretty much 24/7. I mean, copies of all her articles throughout the 50s appear in that file, as do summaries written by FBI agents for J. Edgar Hoover, summarizing what she was talking about and writing about, and concerns that she had sort of, whistleblowers and insider sources and stories. The FBI viewed her with a great deal of concern because she was, what today you would call sort of like a definitive investigative journalist who kept pushing and pushing until she got the answers.
We need more people like that nowadays. Yeah. See, seems like the fine art of investigative reporting has taken a back seat.
In fact, I don't know if you know this, but if you've ever seen the movie with Warren Beatty, The Parallax View, early 1970s movie, where there's this secret group that sort of hires assassins, to carry out assassinations where it cannot be tracked down. Well, one of the characters in there is played by an actress named Paula Prentice, who is a journalist who dies suddenly after she tells Warren Beatty's character that she's worried she's going to die. And that character, played by Paula Prentice, is actually based on Dorothy Kilgallen.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, okay, now where does this leave then currently Area 51 when it comes to UFOs? I mean, it still has that stigma attached to it, so to speak. But I mean, is it still being pushed like it used to be, especially like in the 80s and early 90s?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, because if you look at things back in the 80s and 90s, I mean, that's really when Lazar was at his height, late 80s, early to mid-90s. Then you had other whistleblowers and claimers coming forward, telling broadly similar stories, but, certainly not as in-depth and as extensive as his story. But in the years that sort of went on from 89, 90, 91. You had the the surfacing of the X-Files show, which actually featured Area 51 in a number of episodes, as did another short-lived show called Dark Skies. They also covered. And on top of that, the guys who made Independence Day, the Air Force was kind of really gung-ho to help with the show because it was, the movie, because it was perceived as being, showing the U.S. military in a good light. Until, that is, the creators of the movie said, well, we want to make mention of Area 51, and the Pentagon was like, no way. You either leave all the references out to Area 51 or we don't help you. And that's a true story. And the production company would not back down, and the Air Force said, sorry, we're not going to help you. That was through the 90s. And certainly today, there are still stories of, people coming forward with strange stories of evidence and claims of super secret aircraft out at Area 51, sort of triangular shaped things that can travel to the moon and back in silence. A lot of really extreme, bizarre tales that go far beyond, Lazar and things like this. So, but there's no doubt that, Area 51 isn't just known for being, the world's most famous secret base, but it's also become part of U.S. pop culture. That's where it's at now. It's kind of like up there with tales of Roswell, Jack the Ripper, who shot JFK, all of those kind of controversial issues. Area 51 has become one of them, and the chances are it's always going to be one of them as well.
Very interesting. Well, we are coming up to our top of the hour break. We got about less than a minute, and when we come back, Nick will still be with us, but we'll also bring in our good friend Hercules. We're going to ask him about his books, and I'm also going to ask about, because Nick's other book is Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, and I'll be interested to know if Hercules sees any connection with the modern day talks of alien abductions, and maybe some of the Greek legends that of the gods abducting fair maidens and the like, all on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned for more.
Exploring the Bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained, UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz.
All right, Tim, welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre.
I'm here. I'm on pins and needles.
Well, we're supposed to have Hercules on the line, but unfortunately,
well, wait a minute. His photo is appearing on my computer screen.
Well,
He says I'm at. I don't want to give his number out. I'm at blah 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 blah.
Okay, we'll just continue talking with Nick until we can bring Hercules into the conversation. So
you think he was strong enough to make it on his own?
That's right, the mighty Hercules used to be one of my favorite cartoons when I was a kid. I'm dating myself there, but Nick, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about your other most recent book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files. Now, you've got a story pretty much right at the very beginning where you're talking about the early contactees, and you've got this really interesting story about this these two gentlemen who went and kind of glommed on to George Adamski. And this is really interesting. You know, last week we had on Greg Bishop and Adam Gorightly talking about their new book, A is for Adamski. And I don't think I've ever heard this story before about these two guys and their extensive FBI files so early in the game.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about Carl Hunrath and Wilbur Wilkinson.
Yes.
And, yeah, well, they were two sort of devotees of George Adamski, and both men had an interest in UFOs that went back to the late 1940s after the whole Kenneth Arnold thing kicked off. And by the early 50s, were sort of really deep in research, but not with groups or organizations, just more like along the lines of a hobby. And both guys lived in Racine, Wisconsin at the time. And Carl Hunrath was sort of the more forceful one. I describe him as sort of like Dr. Frankenstein to Wilkinson's eagle, or that kind of thing. And Hunrath was a single guy. He was bachelor. Wilkinson was married with a couple of kids. And at one point, Hunrath decided that, well, all the UFO stuff, the whole scene's going down in California. So he decided to head out there and eventually managed to get Wilkinson to convince his wife that, hey, you know, we should move out to California as well. And so they literally hooked up with everybody on the West Coast back then, and sort of, you know, close by as well. George Adamski, George Van Tassel, Truman Bethlehem, Orfeo Angelucci, all of the early people in the contactee movement. And they were sort of talking to everybody, learning as much as they could. And but they had a really intriguing situation happen, and a very odd story. For example, Hunrath seemed to almost effortlessly sort of move his way into, you know, the whole community in California, UFO research of that particular area, so the early 50s. And on top of that, there were rumors that, excuse me, that George Hunt Williamson, one of the other contactees, heard rumors that Hunrath was supposedly had been sort of bought out by the Russians and was acting as like a Soviet spy, so to speak, and getting as much information for the Russians as he could on UFOs, whether it was UFO sightings or the contactees or whatever aspect of it. Now, whether or not that's true, we don't know, but it was an existing rumor. And there are references in his FBI file to how supposedly he developed technology to bring planes out of the sky, and he was quite happy, in his own words, you know, that it didn't matter to him if it was American planes, as long as the technology worked, he'd be happy to see it put into place. And he's a very controversial guy. Now, the whole thing came to a head in November 53 when Wilkinson and Hunrath took off from a small airport just outside of LA, claiming to people like Williamson and other friends in the contactee movement, claiming that they'd met with a group of aliens and they were going to fly off to meet them and see them, where there was going to be an important exchange of information. And this was November 53, and that was the last that was ever heard of Carl Hunrath and Wilbur Wilkinson. They took off, they hired this little plane, like a two-seater plane, were never seen again, taking off from just outside of LA. And an extensive study of the area was undertaken by the emergency services. There was no wreckage was found, no plane, no last, final messages on the radio, and, no telltale fires or smokestacks out in the forests and so on. For all intents and purposes, they really had gone. And very briefly, it became a big story in LA, where the 3 or 4 big LA newspapers that existed at that time covered the whole story and actually went to the house of Mrs. Wilkinson and said, well, what do you think happened? And she was like in tears and in a panic. And she led them down into the cellar of the house, where there was all this sort of strange alien writing on the walls and messages about aliens. And but that was the end of them. They were never seen again. And I include that in the book because if you believe they were abducted on this flight, this is arguably an early alien abduction, but very different to abductions of today, where people were taken from the beds and so on. The Hunrath Wilkinson pretty much is revolved around, the abducting of an aircraft, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Very, very strange story. I remember Jim Mosley used to dwell on it when I was working for him. He'd go into detail. I guess he had some correspondence with them in the old days as well.
Did,
They were part of the, I guess the outer fringes of the Adamski Skywatch group. I mean, Adamski, even those that didn't necessarily accepted his story, he still had a group, a closely knit group of people who went out for sky watches and got involved in the UFO hysteria at the moment. Tim, why don't we bring in, I guess at this point, our other guest of the evening, Mr. Hercules.
Greetings and welcome. How are you?
Hey.
Right from top of Mount Olympus. Hey, Herc.
Yes, and visiting folks that I greatly respect and admire. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you, sir. That'll get you on the program 3 more times this year.
Always happy.
You have been a busy man contributing to our books. In fact, there's a book that just came out today, which you don't even have a copy of. And I only got because I called and complained to the higher authorities at Amazon, because the post office said that I didn't exist, that the building and apartment that I lived in. Yeah.
That's happened to me too.
Yeah, I don't know what the problem with the post office is, but they seem to have, out of all the different delivery services, as far as I'm concerned, they have the worst record. And I actually had a dispute with the lady on the phone from the post office, her insisting that there was no apartment, 4 in this building. Well, how would she know? She's never spent the night here. I mean, what the heck? Anyway, so this book is one that Tim put together for us. It's Gef the Talking Mongoose, the 8th wonder of the world. Myself being the 7th wonder in the world, and it's quite a story. I know we want to devote an entire program somewhere along the line to this tale, which I consider to be one of the top 14 paranormal events all time. I would rate it right up there, next to some of these mysterious disappearances. But you had a different kind of a Hercules, a little different approach in the book. What was your submission?
Well, when we were down in Pennsylvania, my wife and I had decided to do some paranormal investigating, because that's something we occasionally did, and we're trying to get to know the community and find our place in it. So we started investigating old legends, and we came across the legend of the Squonk. And the Squonk was a mysterious creature. Yes, it's an old logging legend. And the Squonk was a mysterious creature that it was difficult to catch a sight of, and it was known by its sobbing. So the Squonk was a very depressed creature and very free in expressing its depression. And a person, Wenting or Wentling, I don't remember the exact name, he supposedly captured one. And when he opened the bag later on, there was nothing but moisture inside the bag. And the Squonk inspired several songs later in the modern era, but it hasn't really been spotted that often in Pennsylvania. I can Google it, see if we could find something.
We'll all get together and sing it, like that. We'll do. Just in honor of Nick, we'll in honor of Nick, we'll do the punk rock version of it.
That'd be awesome, and then we could summon some squonks from wherever they are.
Well, it kind of reminds me, and I was telling Tim Schwartz earlier today. He's going to be on the Coast to Coast. I think coming up in a few days. That there is similarities between this case and the Skinwalker Ranch. Because now, Tim, you start out the book here by telling the story about the gentleman who first saw Gef the Talking Mongoose,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
it appeared to the daughter. The daughter is a giant cat.
No, no, no.
Wow.
One of the Jim Irving and his daughter Vori
Yes.
one day saw a cat in their yard, and they didn't have any. They didn't own any cats, and there wasn't any barnyard cats that lived there. So Jim was afraid, naturally for his chickens. So he got his shotgun, and he said later that he wasn't intending to kill it. He was just going to go and scare it off because he liked cats. But as he followed it, it vanished in front of his eyes, and
Ooh.
and then later.
Well, that's certainly reminiscent of a Skinwalker ranch. I mean, how do we know that all these things that Gef is supposed to do, like aren't shaped? How do we know that the mongoose isn't a little the shapeshifter?
Well, afterwards, later in the house, Jeff's voice told him that it said that that was me you saw, Jim. So Gef did claim at various times that he could he could not only become invisible, but he could change shape as well. And there's also a story in the book where a couple of young men came to visit the house, and when they were sitting in the living room, one of them started petting a cat that was on his lap, except only he could see the cat. Nobody else could see it.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, there's a lot of paranormal creatures like that. One of the things we investigate in Pennsylvania, I haven't written about it or published anything on it yet, but it was a creature that looked like a badger and a serpent had mated. And it would slither, and it had glowing red eyes, and it would spread fear, and it liked chasing bicycles. And it sounded a very unlikely thing to be going on. But we found the more people we interviewed about it, the more people were reporting experiences, and that the experiences were intergenerational. Everybody too embarrassed to talk about what they'd experienced. So there's more under heaven and earth that are dreamed of in our philosophies, as Shakespeare said.
Well, now your background, you were born in Greece.
I was conceived in Greece, and I was born here.
Yeah.
Okay. And my early years were spent here most of the year, and then the summers in Greece. But I went to Greek parochial school and received a very thorough education in our antiquities, and I always resonated with Olympus. My family used to say,
I know you are the most fabulous a researcher when it comes to the story of the Greek gods and life on Mount Olympus. I've never heard anybody tell the tales. So I mean, I've heard them before, growing up in the course of school and all, and they kind of bored me. But you've kind of like made them all exciting again. I know in previous conversations and in some of the literature that you've written for us, you've even talked about how the gods of Olympus have come down in modern times. Well, we did this book, Screwed by the Aliens, which has become rather popular. And you told the tales in there, I believe, about how these gods from Olympus were coming down even to this day, and mating with the people that were living on the Greek islands there. Now, this is kind of very similar to the UFO abduction cases that are reported. Where you see a parallel in that?
Oh, there's a great parallel in it. In the Greek tales, there aren't any laboratories with genetic experiments. It's done through selective breeding. So just like other gods elsewhere pick people in a particular place.
Myself better, yeah.
I find it much more human as well. Being sworn in the lab is kind of dehumanizing, but the fact that the gods love us and find us attractive and want to mix their ichor with our blood and produce certain individuals, I find that very comforting.
Mm. Well, the Bible talks about that, Tim. I think you've brought that up in some of your books too. In Genesis, they talk about how the daughters of mankind were fair, and they came down and mated with them.
Oh yeah. Well, and that Reverend Downing talks about that as well in both his books.
Yeah, UFO Revelations. Yeah, certainly he does.
Yeah.
So now, so you're convinced, Hercules, then, that these gods of Olympus are real. They're not fictitious. That Zeus and all of these of the gods actually existed or do exist today.
I personally believe that, and I've researched it extensively. And aside from my personal experiences, which of course, anybody can, say that one's personal experiences aren't valid, although that's how we know the world, through our personal experiences. I've met countless individuals who are in contact with the Olympians, and I have gotten messages, the same message from different individuals who aren't connected to each other from the Olympians. So when you start getting a message echoed, like a message will come to you in a dream or a meditation, and of course, again, I like to look inside first to see if it's a product of my psychology, and then all of a sudden you get people calling you up and saying that they had a dream or they had a meditation or they heard Zeus saying something, and you're hearing the same thing from everybody. And then the theme of the message starts echoing synchronistically in your world, and to me that lends credence to the fact that whatever the Olympians are, ultimately, they are intelligences who are active in our world.
Now, what are the messages?
Well, you want me to tell you a story and to trace how the story came through?
That's what we're here.
Okay.
That's what we're here to do.
I'll give you an example that started around the same time that I started submitting stories to you. At that point in my journey, I was still leaning very heavily toward most of its psychological theory. I understood about archetypes. I understood about a lot of different ways of looking at that, including genetic predisposition and so forth. But during a meditation one day, I had a vision of Zeus. And it was the Zeus of Olympia, one of the wonders of the world, as you said before. And I got a feeling from this vision that, basically I'm looking at the whole fatherhood thing wrong, and that I still had father issues. And that I would remain stuck at a certain point until I resolved those father issues. Now, I'm a father myself, so I looked back at that, and okay, maybe this is some part of my psychology telling me I need to look at this, and I will look at it. But then, when communicating with one of the celestial groups that I wrote about in my most recent submission, the person I was communicating with, and this is the sixth revelation, it's an offshoot of the Urantia book, Michael started telling me, Michael Duncan, that he was having these communications with Zeus. So I told him, great, what is Zeus telling you? And it was kind of partially flippantly, at that point. And he gave me the same message that I had inside of my own vision. So that was unusual, but again, okay. So I started thinking about my vision even more. And then the theme of fatherhood and the types of fatherhood issues that came up in the vision started echoing synchronistically for weeks, whereas this type of topic has never come up before, or rarely come up before. It was coming up a lot. So I had to pay attention to this because I could no longer excuse it as being something inside my head. So I learned through my subsequent journey as I got in contact with more and more people that some people give consistent messages, even though they're not connected to each other, like oracles. As we know, Circe, who I've had on the show, and you introduced me to, in fact. She gets really good messages. And that's pretty much the story in a nutshell. And this led me to look at the phenomenon as something less psychological and something more, external, and to have me looking at ways in which we might be connected in ways beyond our current understanding. So that's where I currently am with all of this. But I'm getting consistent messages from all over the place from people. So that's exciting and new.
Mm-hmm. And what form do they take? I mean, are these gods in physical form, or do they inhabit another dimension?
I believe that, as I've written in some of my submissions, I believe that they exist someplace else, and they can become physical if they choose to. Mm-hmm. So they can come into somebody as a walk-in, for instance, or they can make a physical body manifest, that it'll be there 1 second and then it'll fade. That doesn't happen often, but it has happened. Or they'll communicate through somebody who's attuned to them. And as you know, there are many people who follow the old ways.
All right, Hercules, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we have to manifest to our bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, more with Hercules on Exploring the Bizarre.
Thank you.
The gods of advertising.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Tonight we are talking with Nick Redfern and Hercules Invictus. And Hercules, we were talking with Nick earlier about his book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files. And I was just curious. I mean, do you see any kind of connections between these old stories of the old gods in Greece and other places, oftentimes swooping down from the heavens and taking people up with them, or doing other sometimes nefarious things, and the more modern stories of UFO occupants and abductions and things like that? I mean, it seems that there are a lot of similarities. The names may have changed over the years, but the methods kind of remain the same.
I would agree with that. And in Greek mythology, which is where we get a lot of our lore about the ultra-terrestrial or extraterrestrial or ultra-dimensional beings that are known as Olympians, they're shape changers. They can appear as anything they'd like to appear as, including animals. In the myths, they take many animal forms. And in their true form, they're beings of light. And that's preserved in the myth of Dionysus. Hera, who was jealous of Zeus's liaisons, convinced Dionysus' mother that she should request of Zeus the boon of seeing him in his true form. And he tried to dissuade her, but she wouldn't have anything of it. And he revealed himself as a being of light, and his intensity was so great that it destroyed her. So just like he raised Athena from inside his own body, he had to raise Dionysus from inside his own body as well. And the gods or the otherworld beings, regardless of how they're portrayed or understood by humans, have always been interested in our reproductive systems.
Oh, yes.
So a lot of the stories are very sexual in nature.
Well, and you see that also as as we've covered extensively in our book, Screwed by the Aliens. Excuse me. How the UFO phenomena and the occupants that seem to be at least associated with it almost from the very beginning has had an almost voyeuristic interest in human
Yes.
sexuality.
There was a book called The Hair of the Alien. It's somewhere in my library, but I don't know where it is right now.
Yes.
That discussed this phenomenon where alien beings who were humanoid, they were Nordics, I guess you'd call them now, had left behind actual pubic hairs after having, other state of mind intercourse with somebody. And the gods have always left evidence of their passing, aside from leaving physical children behind. I don't know how that would translate in terms of studying DNA. I don't know very much about DNA or how that works, but that might be an interesting thing to start looking at.
Well, the DNA study that was conducted on that hair that was left behind, in that case from Hair of the Aliens, revealed some very interesting things. One of them was that even though the hair was almost completely devoid of color, it came from somebody from a very unique
yes, I remember that.
Yeah, that's located like in only one place in like South China, a very very remote location with just a very small population. But there also was there seemed to have been some kind of Scandinavian
yes,
connection in that as well. The other interesting thing was that the DNA contained an immunity to various human diseases, including HIV and a few other, especially sexually transmitted diseases, which to me is very interesting because it's like, well, if we're going to play around with the humans, we got to make sure that we don't catch their diseases.
Yes, thank you. Remember, as you started speaking, I started remembering that parts of the book. It's been a while since I read it, but yes, you're absolutely correct. The genetic materials from really remote places on Earth, and really like isolated populations that weren't very common, and that you're right. There was a lot of immunity to diseases that are plaguing humanity. So that was very interesting.
Which makes me wonder then, you talk about the close association with the ancient gods and humans. Is there a are we related to them somehow, or are they related to us? I mean, I know that you said that their true form is their beings of light, their energy. Ultimately, if you break us all down to our component parts, everybody is, everything is
exactly.
But I mean, are we the offspring, so to speak, of these deities?
I personally believe, and again, my beliefs may change as I study more and experience more, but
sure.
I personally believe at this particular point in time that we are the dreams of the gods. So,
okay, elaborate on that.
Just like we have characters in dreams, and the dreams are aspects of ourselves, like everyone has dreams. And in your dreams, you have like a holodeck. You're creating three-dimensional, fully immersive experiences automatically. I believe that whatever we're calling waking reality is something similar. And I've spent a lifetime not only studying, the Olympians, but also studying like different states of mind. Like I do dream work, I meditate. I don't take any substances to do this. I don't feel we need them, but with my own brain. So I've been playing with my brain since I was a kid, and I know that like there are states like the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic that make our waking reality look fuzzy. So I believe that on other rates of vibration or in other dimensions, we're beings of light. But here, in what we're calling waking reality, we're part of some automatically generated experience that we're all a part of. Just like in the first book I submitted to with Philip K. Dick and the Matrix type of nature is reality.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
that's what I
beginning to
come to
believe
believe.
more and more that we are somebody's computer-generated life form.
Yes, or
I think
psychologically
I think that
generated life
there's a
form.
great deal of validity to that.
Yeah, that's where I am with it. And so far, since and you helped bring me to that point, because I was preparing something for that book, and I thought about certain things that I hadn't really looked at in a certain way. And I remembered a lot of things like the gods viewed us as entertainment. And they would like be hovering over the Trojan War, and they would occasionally act for different people or manifest briefly, and so we were a form of a video game to them, and this reality was the video game world. And in other myths, it's kind of like the same thing. They're there, but they're not there. They intervene, but sometimes indirectly. They seem to have some sort of rules that they're following, but those rules aren't very clear, to us, because we're the avatars in this video game they're playing.
Well, I can see why there is no disclosure, right, Tim? Because how do you get on? How does the current president certainly couldn't get on the TV and explain it, but even some of the previous ones, I can't imagine going into this kind of depth of any expanded to consciousness. They would have to leave it as let's just say they're from outer space and get it over with, right?
Yeah, that's the easiest.
Right.
Yeah, it's the easiest. Yeah, they come from Mars or Uranus, either one, wherever you want to believe they come from. I mean, I don't know. They're here and they're part of the environment and the where we live, and we coexist with them, and I think we've coexisted with them since the beginning of time. Tim, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
Well,
I would say
and
too.
Yeah, go ahead, Hercules. I'm sorry.
No. I would agree there too. And there was a book called Disneyland of the Gods. Yes, and he went into that like really, really deeply in there. He was awesome. I'm fortunate I got to meet him like years ago.
Yeah, well, yeah, John Keel. He lived in the the neighborhood here, not too far away, and a couple of blocks walk. And we used to get together at his apartment at night and converse till the wee hours. It was me and John and Barbara Hudson would stop over from time to time, who has kind of mysteriously disappeared. She had some very unique stories. In fact, Adam and Greg were talking about her last week. She had actually met a group. I think they were from New England. In fact, they called themselves the group, and they were starting at a very young age. I think she was about 16 at the time. They materialized in her apartment in Harlem, and she went to this secret headquarters several times. And it was like, as I understand it, it was like a classroom. Now, I'm not sure if she was the only pupil or not, but they taught her in the ways of the space people, and she had some fairly interesting. She was one of these, Tim, what we call UFO repeaters. People that have experiences almost on a regular basis, like we've had our friend Mark Brinkerhoff on the show quite a few times, and he has these experiences, and he's able to stick his neck and his camera out his window right there off of Central Park and take photographs of these strange objects in the sky. Yeah. Where you and I might not be so lucky out there in Jasper, Indiana, right there. I would say.
No, definitely not. Hercules, what do you think is there has been? I'm trying to think of the. Oh, okay. The Neil Gaiman's novel American Gods. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't read the novel or the comic book, but I picked up the series because they televised it, and I'm up to the last 2 episodes.
You know, one of the interesting things, and I mean, and he's not the first one to put this idea across, is that the deities of humanity are actually the result kind of our own belief systems. I mean, do you think that there is any validity to that? Because I mean, you talked about how the gods are like forms of energy and light and things like that. I mean, so did they come first, or did we come first and create them? And continue to create them, with our own, Santa Claus and, things like that, so to speak.
I think a little of both. I think that the beings of light, whatever they ultimately are and whatever ultimately we are, because I believe that we're like manifestations of them, came first. And I believe that from here, we mold them with astral substance or imagination. And because the human experience, despite the fact that we're all individuals and unique, has a lot of common features. So our growth experience here, either in one life or through many lives, it kind of follows a pattern that I guess you can call shamanic in one way. And Joseph Campbell wrote an excellent book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, that kind of defines this journey, and you find this journey played out in comic books and novels and movies. So it's kind of like a universal multi-purpose pattern, with recognizable tropes. So I believe it's a little of both. I believe that as our understanding of ourselves and our universe increases, we project different things out there about the gods, and eventually that's how we understand and communicate with the gods. So I think these are all like approaches, and all of them are good. In my experience, such as it is at this particular point, the Olympians seem to welcome any attempt to understand them, whether it's ancient astronauts or as aliens or ultra-terrestrial beings. It's just taking the journey, and it's like an invitation. Like the night sky had all those constellations, which were the stories from Greek mythology. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of astral or astromythological teachings. Like there's a lot of names for it now, but people are becoming more and more aware of it. That's kind of like an initiatic journey to transcend who you are and to become more. And the stories in Greek mythology are full of people who were people for a while, and then they discovered the divine spark, and then they returned home, to Olympus and became full-blown gods. So I believe that that's part of the universal journey, to recognize that all of us are, in our essence, beings of light. And whether Greek mythology takes you there, or Christianity, or Adamski's Venusians, it doesn't really matter, as long as you heed the call and see what you find by answering the call.
Well, that's good. That's kind of why we, I think, years ago, decided to call our little publishing company here Inner Light, because we've always felt that it's up to the individual to find their own golden path. But then what I discovered was it was not really an original name that other metaphysical and occult groups had used. Inner Light Foundation, Inner Light Organization, Inner Light Society. They had caught on to this previously, before I came around in the 1960s, to whip the world into order.
And to me personally, and in terms of my own life and my own journey, it's always associated with what you've done, because that's how I first became aware of the concept of inner light, and through your publication. So in my personal mythology, That represents what you've given to the world and how you've contributed toward everybody's sense of wonder and exploration, both inner and outer, and this dimension and the other.
I have hoped that I have at least accomplished that in my. Of course, now some people, Tim, in the field would suggest that I perhaps my gift of entertainment was overdone.
No, because you need you need that humor. You can't take yourself too seriously on the path. Like I take myself seriously, but not solemnly. I realize that a lot of what I'm saying sounds ridiculous to most people, but that's okay. This is my life. This is what I've discovered. I'm willing to share it. I'm willing to admit that, So that's it.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. And we are kind of Tim. Aren't we getting close to the end of the program here?
Yeah, we're at the 5 minute mark right now.
That shows you how bad my eyesight. I'm looking at the time on the. What am I looking at? Oh, the laptop. Oh, yeah. Well, that'll just take me over the edge. It's all this medication. None of it very interesting. I might admit. It's just kind of boring stuff, But well, I think we ought to take Nick. You're still out there, are you? Or have you been captured by the Olympians?
No, I'm still here.
Are you? You're a big man on the lecture circuit. Have you got any dates coming up?
Yeah, I've got a few coming up actually. For the year ahead, I'll be speaking in the just outside Los Angeles, about an hour, on the weekend of the 26th, which is called the Alien Snowfest. And
no way! And who else is? I got to hear about this. Well, who's on that program?
Sure. I'm not entirely sure who else is speaking, but I'm talking about the history and theories for the Men in Black mystery, and then into March I'm speaking at the BioCity Paranormal Symposium in South Texas, and so I've got a few things coming up in the next couple of months, lecture-wise.
And the books, the titles of the current ones, yeah.
Yeah, the two I've got out right now, Area 51 and Alien Abduction Files. They'll sort of see me through for the next 6 months, probably.
You mean it takes you more than 2 months to put a book together, just because they're 450 pages, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. It's for people who have never written anything. Let them try, I say. to put something together. All right. Well, you've got a full slate, as they say. And Hercules, you have a program yourself, I know, on the air.
3 podcasts on Blog Talk Radio: Voice of Olympus, Pride of Olympus, and the Elysium Project. Voice of Olympus is about living Greek mythology. Pride of Olympus is about Olympianism and modern outer space groups. And the Elysium Project is about taking Olympian ideals and doing good in the world. So we have a political program, we have a human service program, we have an optimal wellness program, and I am an elected official, and I'm running for city council in this election.
Where?
In Tenafly, New Jersey.
Oh my goodness! And are you independent or?
I'm currently on the Democratic County Committee. I'm a member of that. I was elected as a write-in. I didn't even know I was in the race. People wrote me in, and I got a letter in the mail. So now I'm the Honorable Hercules Invictus, and I announced that I'm running for council. So I'll find out next week if I'm going to be supported or not. But people are giving me endorsements, from all over the place, and my unconventional views are very well known. I'm in the paper a lot, with the things that I do here locally. So I'm very excited by that. And I also write for the most awesome and luridly titled anthologies in existence. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. Let's see what are the titles of those? Let's see, UFO Hostilities, the Alien Evil Agenda. but UFO hostilities. Just remember that. And the other one is my favorite, of course, is Screwed by the Aliens, which is a
Alien Bloodlust, and
yeah, Alien Bloodlust, yeah,
Hidden Treasures, and
did we do all? And we did all those books?
Monsters.
Yeah, yeah, and we did all those books in about 3 months. Which
in the past
Yeah.
year or so, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
All right, gentlemen, we have to say good night.
YouTube.
Good night. Thank you.
YouTube channel, Mr. UFO Secret Files, and come on back next week and tell your friends whether they're on this planet in another dimension or somewhere out there among the stars.
Good night.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.